Did you make it clear to the Prime Minister that if you didn't get that money, you would have walked?
I was going to fight hard for more money to invest in defence.
We can't just spend more, we've got to spend better.
If 2.68% by 2030 was a resigning matter for the previous Defence Secretary, why is it good enough for him?
This is it. A year after it was ordered by the PM, it's here. 80 pages of facts, figures, graphs and tables, bombs and bullets, blood and treasure. Its contents led to the resignation of the Defence Secretary. It even helped precipitate the end of Keir Starmer's premiership. So the question, after all the rows behind the scenes, does this plan keep us safe from Vladimir Putin, or is it an unfunded hand grenade lobbed into the in tray of the next PM? Here's Keir Starmer asking and answering his own questions today.
I think a test of any Prime Minister is whether they leave the country in a better state than they found it. And if you look at our country, that is undoubtedly a case on the economy, undoubtedly a case on public services, in particular the NHS, but also undoubtedly the case on defence and security and international leadership.
Well, let's do a little fact check on that claim. First, in support of the PM, here's the NATO chief in this very studio yesterday.
I think what you will see is that the UK will make a big step, which is one, which will not get you to the 3.5, but a big step on the way to the 3.5%, which will mean there is more necessary. But I think that will also be acknowledged, that there is more to be done over the coming years.
More to be done, most certainly, and the more will now have to be done by Andy Burnham, as the outgoing PM kind of admitted today.
This plan represents our best judgment of what the country needs to meet this moment. And it is a platform on which I know my successor will build.
That sounds so collegiate, but the small print sets out the nightmare that awaits. This, the innocuously named Defence Investment Plan Funding Explainer, does pretty much exactly what it says on the tin. It explains that clever people in the Treasury and Number 10 have basically robbed Peter, the Transport Department, and Ed Miliband's net zero budget to pay Paul, the MOD. And regional mayors are pretty furious.
Andy Burnham is not the Prime Minister. He is not in government. He's not the leader of the Labour. But he's not the Labour. I don't know what briefing has been given to Andy Burnham, and I think it would be wrong to make an assumption that he is suddenly all over the detail of where some of this funding is coming from.
She's planning to appeal to him in his capacity as the patron saint of devolution. Now, Andy Burnham was supposed to have been across this plan, but despite the daylight robbery of the Transport and Energy departments, the sums still don't quite add up. There's a £4.7 billion black hole, which the explainer explains will be confirmed at Budget 2026 in a fair and balanced way. Well, that basically means higher taxes, borrowing, or just pray for a growth miracle. Well, let's get the details on today's plan then. Here's our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes. Deborah.
It took 1 year, the resignation of 2 ministers, and heated rows over cash. But the UK does finally have an investment plan for defence that's meant to end decades of decline.
The best way to avoid war is to prepare for it. The best way to defend is to deter, to have the strength to make your adversaries think again before they act. And that is what we are delivering. Keir, nice to see you.
Strong rhetoric. Yet it's never been backed up by the kind of funding the military says it needs. Still, Dan Jarvis, the new Defence Secretary, gave the plan the big sell, having squeezed an extra £1.5 billion from the Treasury. But that only happened after his predecessor quit in protest at being shortchanged.
More money matters, of course it does, but so do the choices we make on how to spend it. And so, I have taken the decision to reprioritise a further £1 billion within the plan to ensure that it better reflects the way that war is waged today.
That's shorthand for cuts, with things like the RAF's Storm Shadow cruise missiles going in favour of a cheaper version. Dozens of military helicopters are also being axed, while a push to expand the cadet force is being slowed down even though initiatives like that are seen as vital for rebuilding wider national resilience. Of course, there is a lot in here about new investments in air, sea and land drones, as well as AI and other technologies that are transforming the battlefield. But the overwhelming bulk of the investment plan is still locked into large legacy platforms, such as submarines and jets that won't be delivered until the 2040s and beyond. It's why there's been such a big bust-up about the need for more cash faster, as that's the only way the rest of defence can possibly get prepared for a potential war with Russia by 2030. From the backbenches, the previous Defence Secretary urged the next Prime Minister to lift spending beyond the ambition set by Sir Keir Starmer of 2.7% of GDP by 2030.
With European security at stake, would my right honourable friends agree that more needs to be done in the months ahead, beyond the dip, to develop a clear, credible funding plan that will hit 3% and that will meet our NATO commitment of 3.5% by 2035?
But all of this will depend on what the man who's expected to take charge thinks, and Andy Burnham's priorities may lie elsewhere. His team is already saying they weren't told in advance that he'd need to find an extra £4.7 billion in his first budget to fund the current commitments. What is true is that more investment in defence will be good for British industry and jobs, as well as for the armed forces. Just as important, though, will be making sure what is already a large budget is spent well. And that's something the Ministry of Defence has failed to do far too many times in the past. Deborah Haynes, Sky News.
Well, a little earlier, I spoke to the Defence Secretary himself, Dan Jarvis. Dan Jarvis, did you have second thoughts about backing the defence investment plan when you think you're spending just 2.7% of GDP on defence by 2030, by which point Vladimir Putin could be attacking us?
No, I didn't have second thoughts because this is £15 billion of new money which we're going to invest in defence, but it sits alongside a commitment to spend £298 billion over the next 4 years. So these are historic levels of investment that we're committing to, and that's really important in terms of the resource. But what's also really important is the capabilities that we are choosing to invest in. We've got to learn the lessons of Ukraine, and I think the Defence Investment Plan shows that we're prepared to bring forward the necessary amount of resource whilst at the same time investing in the kind of capabilities that we're going to need now and in the near future.
Historic levels of investment, or actually just a down payment. I just want to put to you, you'll be very familiar with this, your predecessor as Defence Secretary, John Healey, said today we need a target date for 3% of GDP and a clear, credible funding plan to meet our NATO commitment for 3.5% on defence by 2035. Is the brutal truth you got the job because you're a yes man and he wasn't?
I don't think anybody thinks that I'm a yes man, and I'm pretty certain that the Prime Minister didn't appoint me on that basis.
So you've had rows about this, haven't you?
He appointed me on the basis that he knew that I would fight for more money for defence. And I have, in 2 weeks, secured 1.5 million more for defence, and that's really important.
Were you prepared to walk if you didn't get that?
I was determined to secure the best deal that I possibly could for defence. I've done that in 2 weeks, but it isn't just about the money.
But did you make it clear that you would walk if you didn't get what you wanted?
I made it clear that I would fight for defence. It's personal to me because, you know, I know a lot of people who serve. I'm very proud of those people who step forward to be in the armed forces, and I have to be able to look them in the eye. I was at Armed Forces Day in Aldershot at the weekend. I have to be able to look these people in the eye and guarantee to them that I will do the best that I possibly can to secure the resources that they need.
But you haven't answered my question, though. Did you make it clear to the Prime Minister that if you didn't get that money, you would have walked?
I made it clear to the Prime Minister that I was going to fight hard for more money to invest in defence, and I've been able, in 2 weeks, to secure 1.5 million. But I've also done some other things as well. I've spent every single day of those 2 weeks rebalancing some of the capabilities, making some quite difficult choices about how we invest and prioritising kit, technology capability that I think we're going to need now in the future. So yes, we've secured more money, but this is a different plan from the one that my predecessor didn't feel that he was able to support.
Where's the clear, credible target?
So we do need a clear, credible target. We've made an absolute binding commitment to be at 3.5% by 2035. We need to chart a trajectory to that point.
And you haven't got that today, have you?
The commitment is that we'll get to 3% in the next Parliament. But over and above that, there is a new commitment now that defence spending will be the #1 priority in the next spending review. We're talking...
There's a £4.7 billion black hole in the plan that you've just published.
To get to the 3.5% commitment will require billions and billions of pounds. I think it's not unreasonable that, given the massive expenditure that will be required, those kind of decisions are done in the context of a spending review. We've made a lot of progress with the Treasury in recent weeks on the back of really constructive negotiations. I've got 1.5 billion more
and
than there was the case
4.7 billion that the next Prime Minister has to raise either by taxes, higher taxes or higher borrowing, or, you know, just pray that you get growth. That's a black hole.
Well, obviously growth will make all of this a lot easier.
Yeah, but it would make life a lot easier for every Prime Minister.
Well, of course. But spending reviews are the point in the cycle where you draw together all of the finances and you make decisions about how you're going to commit resource.
Yeah, but it's a hand grenade for whoever becomes Chancellor, isn't it?
Absolutely the opposite. I know a bit about hand grenades. It's not one of those. It's the opposite of those.
What is the opposite of a hand grenade?
The worst world would have been if we hadn't sorted this out. Our allies, our armed forces, defence industry, who employ millions of people around the country, need the certainty of the Defence Investment Plan. So we needed to get on and get that agreement and get it published in order to provide that certainty. That was the right thing to do. My predecessor didn't feel that he was able to do that for reasons that I understand. We've made progress over 2 weeks and we have been able to do it.
But it is the case that whoever comes in next has either got to raise taxes or borrowing if they don't get growth, correct, to fund this?
I think there is a consensus around the need to spend more on defence. The world is a very dangerous place. And what I've done is rework some of the capabilities to make sure that we can deliver some of the military capability that we're going to need earlier than would otherwise have been the case. You're right to say that we need to chart a course to 3.5%, and that will require billions of investment. And that will be the job of the person who's drawing together the next spending review, so we can have that clarity and provide that clarity to our allies.
Did Andy Burnham sign off on the cuts to road projects to pay for this?
We've had to make some difficult decisions. I've personally had to make some tough choices over the past 2 weeks, but that was the right thing to do.
Yeah, people are furious about it, roads.
I understand the concerns that people have expressed, but what I've got to do is make sure that we are best placed to defend the nation at a point where the world is more dangerous than at any point in our lives. So
Did Andy Burnham sign off on the cuts to road budgets?
Of course, there have been conversations as part of the process of transition. But
and conversations about that specifically? Or is this news to him today?
So Andy Burnham is someone that I know very well. He was a Metro Mayor at the same time as I was a Metro Mayor. I know how much emphasis he places on securing the nation and on national security.
And on devolution, as we know from yesterday.
Absolutely on devolution. And we were Metro Mayors together. We spent a lot of time talking about devolution. But what I know about Andy is he's absolutely committed, as any Labour Prime Minister will be, to make sure that we've got the right resources and the right capabilities to defend our nation.
Right,
and we're
so
trying to do that.
he agreed to put defence ahead of the road projects. He signed off on that or not?
The choices that have been made, the difficult choices that have been made in order to make sure that we've got the resource to fund the kind of capabilities that we need to keep our country
But, I mean, you're
safe.
not answering the question, so I can only assume that he hasn't signed off on that. So, therefore, he could just tear this up when he gets in, couldn't he?
I have complete confidence that Andy, as Prime Minister, will absolutely make sure that we safeguard our national security and that we've got the investment, the resources, the capabilities we need to keep the country safe, to work with our allies at a point of challenge. The world is
Even
a very
if it runs
dangerous place.
counter to his devolution programme?
Devolution will, I think, provide huge benefits and opportunities for our country, and Andy is an absolute expert on all of that, and I completely agree with the kind of faith that he has in investing resources in regional mayors. But I have complete faith also that he understands the importance of national security. Right. And that's why I have complete confidence that he will make sure we've got the resources that we need.
And do you
but sometimes
expect to
that does involve
continue
difficult choices.
Do you expect to continue as Defence Secretary under Andy Burnham?
It's a massive privilege for me to be back in defence and to be around people doing amazing things on behalf of the nation. I love doing this job. It's not an easy job, but it's a great privilege to do it. But ultimately, it will be for Andy Burnham as the next Prime Minister to decide who he wants to be in his cabinet.
But you'd like to carry on?
I mean, it's a huge privilege to serve in this role.
You talked about the people who do amazing things, the military, you've mentioned several times, and given your military hinterland, that's completely understandable. Does the Chief of the Defence Staff back this plan, or did he ask for a sentence saying he supported it to be removed because of this funding gap we've been talking about?
So I've worked closely, very closely with the Chief of Defence Staff every single day since I was appointed a couple of weeks ago. He's made a massive contribution to this process. And I know that the Chief of the Defence Staff, and he's put out a statement along with the other chiefs, absolutely welcomes the publication of this Defence Investment Plan. I'm really grateful to him and to the chiefs for their service, for the work that they do, but specifically for the support that they provided to this plan.
But was there originally supposed to be a support from him within that plan that was then removed because of the funding gap, or not? So
I was sat next to the Chief of the Defence Staff when the Prime Minister announced the plan this morning.
Right.
The Chief of the Defence Staff has made a massive contribution to this process. I'm really grateful for that, and he absolutely welcomes the publication of the plan
was there
today.
originally a sentence from him in the plan, or it's just a yes or no?
You'll forgive me, I've not been personally involved in the minutiae of some of the drafting.
But he backs it to the hilt despite the funding gap.
I was sat next to the Chief of the Defence Staff when we launched the plan this morning.
Right.
He welcomes the plan, and I'm very grateful for the contribution he's made to it.
You've talked about how hard you fought to get this extra money.
Yeah.
Could you have held out for more, do you think?
I have fought very hard for defence, and I will continue to fight very hard for defence. The Prime Minister and myself will go to the NATO summit in Ankara just next week. Our international allies want to see UK leadership. We've provided that today, not just with the 15 billion, not just with the 298 billion, historic levels of funding, but also in the switch of capability that we've also seen. We've got to learn the lessons of Ukraine. We've got to make sure that we are best geared to operate alongside our allies in NATO and elsewhere. And the publication of this plan today has been a really big positive step forward in that regard.
Well, talking of learning the lessons about Ukraine, you know, obviously you've got to make clear you're not fighting the battles of the last war.
Yeah.
Is it right that a quarter of the defence budget will be going on the nuclear deterrent? Is that the right priority? Do you have to have an open conversation about whether that is appropriate in this day and age?
I don't think we need an open conversation about it because our national security is underpinned by the independent nuclear deterrent. When I was at NATO just last week, it was absolutely clear of the value that we contribute to that partnership because of our independent nuclear contribution. It's only the US that has that capability in the same way that does. I think the other would say about the independent nuclear deterrent is it generates thousands and thousands of jobs right around the country. So good for our national security, good for our economic prosperity.
And good for growth is the message to Andy Burnham.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I'm most proud of is that the 15 billion that we've secured for this plan will create nearly 60,000 jobs around the UK. Good, skilled defence jobs. I'm really proud that a Labour government is delivering that.
When you were offered this job, given the circumstances, what happened to your predecessor and what's at stake here, did you think twice before taking it? Did you have a long sort of consideration in your head?
Not really, because I believe in service. I believe in a contribution to the country. I'd been the security minister for 2 years. I knew quite a bit about how we keep our country safe. And when the Prime Minister said, will you step up and serve as the Defence Secretary, I didn't feel that I could say no to that.
And
but I was also clear that I would fight hard for defence. That's what I've done. And that's why I'm pleased that we've been able to get this plan over the line. This is a plan that has been 12 months in the production. I've had 2 weeks to get a grip of it. We've got more money and better capabilities. I'm really proud of what we've achieved over the past fortnight or so.
And Andy Burnham could build on this, and if he can find some more money from welfare, for example, you'd be keen to stay on and implement that?
I'm absolutely confident of the importance that Andy Burnham attaches to our national security, and I know that he will make sure that we've got the resource, the capabilities we need at a point of challenge. I have not a shred of doubt about that.
Dan Jarvis, thank you very much for coming in and telling us all about the plan. It's been a long time coming, but it's great to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you.
In this interregnum period, with Keir Starmer on his way out and Andy Burnham on his way in, it's just striking how many ministers are being very honest about all the behind-the-scenes battles that are going on. So Dan Jarvis there just talking about the fight he's had to secure billions extra for defence in the 2 weeks since he's been Defence Secretary. Clearly been some horrible choices he's had to make. He's decided to cut road budgets to fund billions more. A lot of people not happy about that. But these are the kind of tough choices he's had to make. Even so, there is a massive black hole in that budget. And I put it to him that this was a hand grenade for Keir Starmer's successor, Andy Burnham. He denies that, the opposite of a hand grenade. Not sure what that is, but this is what Dan Jarvis says. And now the last defence minister to sit on my sofa, Al Khan's, walked out of the studio and quit pretty much straight away. I really got the sense that the new Defence Secretary was using the sofa to audition to keep his job under the incoming Prime Minister, Andy Burnham. Well, tonight on the sofa we have Labour peer Baroness Ayesha Hazarika and Spectator editor and former Minister Lord Michael Gove. We'll hear from them in just a moment, but first let's get more on the Defence Investment Plan and that interview with Dan Jarvis from Lord Peter Ricketts, former National Security Advisor and head of the Diplomatic Service. Well, Peter, you've written a book called Hard Choices. Were the right hard choices made today or not?
Strategy is all about hard choices, and I think there's a good and a bad in today. The good is they did make some choices. I mean, they really have put more money towards the battle-winning technologies we're seeing in Ukraine. They've put it up in lights, of course, so we couldn't miss it. Drones, AI, cyber, sensors, more cheaper missiles quickly produced. I mean, that is all sensible. And they have scratched around and found 15 billion extra pounds outside a spending review. Michael will know how difficult that is. Of course, they only did it because the new Chief of Defence Staff, beginning of the year, sounded the alarm and said there was a £28 billion gap in the funding agreed last year. So that is good. But it's also true that it's not enough, that there is no credible plan to get to what Prime Minister has committed to, which is 3.5% of GDP by 2035. And without a credible plan, when he goes to NATO next week, it doesn't help British leadership.
He's basically going naked into the negotiating chamber,
well,
to coin the phrase from a previous era.
At least they've got a plan out, and there is good things in the plan. There are things which address that serious problem we've got with delivering our NATO capabilities. That will bring us up the NATO lead table. That'll be welcome to people. So for a short term, it's a good step, but it's only a step on the way. And I suppose the risk is that this will be taken as the job done. Andy Burnham didn't seem to mention defence or foreign policy in his speech. So getting a sense that this is just a waypoint towards much more difficult decisions to get up to that kind of much bigger step change in defence spending. I mean, that's an all-of-society choice. It can't be really one party.
Right.
The country's got to come together to decide, are we going to do this or not?
So an honest discussion with people about the kind of sacrifices that need to be made.
Yeah.
Whether that's roads or schools or welfare.
Absolutely, because you won't get it by, looking down the back of the Whitehall sofas to find the extra billion here or there. Yeah. I mean, to get beyond where they are now, which is 2.7% of GDP, to get anywhere near 3.5 is a complete step change.
And this little document, the Defence Investment Plan Funding Explainer, which explains very neatly the black hole in the budget. That is a hand grenade for the next Prime Minister, isn't it?
Well, it's a problem he's going to have straight away, because if he's going to maintain...
I love that for a diplomat, a hand grenade is a problem.
Yeah, it certainly is a problem, yeah, absolutely. No, it is, but I'm such a diplomat, I shall skirt that. The problem is he's got to front up to his NATO allies. He's new, they won't know him. He's got to rebuild the credibility that Keir Starmer built with his successful work on the coalition of the willing on Ukraine, in the Gulf. I mean, he's a respected figure, as you heard from Mark Rutte yesterday. But Andy Burnham can't get through without showing that he's serious about keeping the country on this trajectory and finding an answer to the hand grenade problem, that there is quite a short-term urgent need to find more cash.
Well, let's put the hand grenade just down the sofa a little bit to Ayesha and Michael. Michael, is this a historic shift or is it just a little down payment?
Neither. You have a zombie Prime Minister and an undead cabinet. And Dan Jarvis is valiantly trying to rescue from the wreckage of the Defence Investment Plan that John Healey, his predecessor, walked away from and said was wholly inadequate. As your questioning proved, the Chief of the Defence Staff, probably under a degree of duress or a sense of duty, said he welcomes the publication. I suspect that he welcomes the fact that some of the wrangling is over, but he won't welcome, nobody could, having said what he said, the inadequate nature of the amount that is being committed. And again, as you pointed out, and Peter, with the masterly and elegant diplomacy of the civil service pointed out, you've got £5 billion significant sum in anyone's money, which is a hole in this. So the hand grenade, as you put it, is in fact a series of incendiary devices that Keir Starmer has tossed into Andy Burnham's lap. And again, as you pointed out, I think Andy Burnham will probably be keen to support whoever he appoints as his defence secretary, but it's not his priority. It's not what gets him up in the morning. So my worry is that out of all of this wreckage, the one winner is Vladimir Putin.
God, well, that's quite a claim. Aisha, to respond to that.
Well, I'll probably be slightly less diplomatic than
Go on.
Sir Peter. And I would say that the reality of this, in terms of the hand grenade, is really, Michael, the fact that the previous Conservative administration really fell well short of the mark in terms of defence spending as well.
Yep.
And, I think...
Yeah, 54 billion under the last
Absolutely.
Tory government, 80 billion by 2029.
So I think it's just a little bit rich saying that this is all the doing of Keir Starmer and he's done some Machiavellian, 3D chess move to sort of really ruin things for Andy Burnham. This is much more serious than, is this a hand grenade from the previous administration? This is deadly serious. I think credit where credit's due. I think it is good that this plan has finally been published. Certainly some of the people I've been speaking to, the military people around the House of Lords, are saying, look, it's good that this is out. There is let's not kid ourselves, there is a significant amount of money that has been found for this. There are already some tough choices. You speak to someone like Hamish Faulkner, who's a Foreign Office minister. That's his constituency. He's losing that bypass.
The roads budget.
So there are,
we've got more on that in a
tough
second.
choices to be made. But I think the reality is what we need, and I would say it's very easy to be partisan about this. We actually need, more than on any subject, cross-party consensus right now about how pressing this issue is.
Okay.
We also, and I agree with, I want to make one other point. I want to agree with what Sir Peter said as well. We need to start having a national conversation with the public about how important furnishing and nourishing our defence, our national resilience, our civil contingencies, because this idea of us being attacked, it's not some fantasy hypothetical 20, 30 years in the future. This is something which is going on now. Just look at what's happening in the Atlantic right now. That's why we have got ships out there.
Peter, I'll come back to you on Putin in a minute. But, Michael, what if Putin, attacks before 2030? What do we say? Whoops, too early, come back later?
Well, he's already attacking. I mean, not in the conventional sense, but it's already the case that the Russians attempted to firebomb Keir Starmer's home. It is already the case that, as Aisha says, that there are vessels in the Atlantic and the High North menacing our cables. It's already the case that there are not direct incursions into UK airspace, but teasing attempts by the Russians to confuse us. It's already the case that there are organised criminal gangs that are in receipt of Russian money in order to make our security...
Cyber security.
Precisely.
Yeah, so where do you find the nearly $5 billion black hole then? How would you fill that if you were in the Treasury?
I'd cut the welfare budget.
Aisha?
Well, it's very easy to say cutting the welfare budget. Just slashing the welfare budget does not magic up this money. I'm all in favour of welfare reform, but to do welfare reform properly, it does take time to get... You don't just pull a lever and all that money stops. I would actually be looking... Personally, I would be looking at more creative ways. I would be looking at defence bonds if I was in the Treasury right now.
Is there a lack of creative thinking in this? Would defence bonds have been an answer to this conundrum?
Yes, I think defence bonds or a multilateral defence bank, which has also been supported by Mark Carney, for example, who knows things a bit about multilateral banks. I think we should be working more closely with our European partners. We should be in that scheme, the SAFE programme, to mobilise money for that. So there are surely ways of being creative and being multinational about this. It's not just our problem, it's other countries as well.
Michael, there's a few solutions there.
No, they're not. I mean, they're all perfectly legitimate ideas, but defence bonds is just borrowing by another name. If you have a multinational bank, it might be an easier bank to draw down from than some others. It's still borrowing. Fundamentally, there is a £5 billion hole. And, of course, working with our allies more effectively on procurement and on financing is a good thing. It contributes to resolving the problem, but it doesn't resolve a problem, particularly when we have in the cliche, our credit card maxed out as a nation.
That's true, isn't it?
There are no easy answers here. Of course, if there have been easy answers that have been found, it's quite striking that the countries that are meeting this NATO target are the ones closest to Russia.
Yes.
You can more or less correlate. The closer you are to Russia, Baltic state, Poland, Scandinavian countries, they're spending it, partly because Russian drones and missiles sometimes come on their territory.
Yeah, they see it every day. It's a reality.
People can see it, and therefore they are behind the government. At the moment, ministers are both being reassuring, for reasons I understand, but also saying there's this massive problem. The problem is saying the massive problem is going to be solved in the 2030s, suggests there's going to be a kind of magic money tree found by the successor's successor.
Oh, the magic money tree is in Ed Miliband's department, isn't it? I mean, that's a final FU from Starmer, isn't it?
What do you mean?
Well, there's a £2 billion cut in this little explainer.
Well, there's going to have to be there's going to have to be cuts across different departments.
Yeah, but that's been singled out, hasn't it?
Which will bring a lot of pain, and people will be very upset when that takes you back to having a really big conversation and also being upfront with people about the hard choices. But in terms of like the money is going to, like, when we get to 2027, we're going to have to open up these conversations again. Remember, if this is important, money will have to be found. And we have sometimes had to borrow things that we think are important. And also, if you did do defence bonds on this or a bit more borrowing, I mean, I'm not a government spokesperson, this is just my kind of thinking, there is an argument that this isn't just borrowing for day-to-day spending. This is borrowing to invest, which would actually stimulate the economy, because defence is a very good stimulator in terms of advanced manufacturing, in terms of SMEs. Lots of different sort of kind of companies could benefit from this.
And that was Mark Rutte's point in the programme last night, that, you know, this is a way of growing the British economy, you know, so that's good, isn't it, to spend, to borrow to invest in that?
No, Aisha makes a good point, and I'm certainly not going to disagree with Mark Rutte. I mean, he knows far more about defence than I do. However...
You can disagree with me.
No, not on this occasion. No, I think what you said was right. I think that there is a challenge, which is, and Peter hinted at it as well, which is there can sometimes be a trade-off between domestic jobs and the most effective kit. Now, ideally, you want to build up sovereign capacity in order to make sure that all of the things that keep your country safe, or as many of them as possible, generate British jobs and investment.
Well, that's what Andy Burnham was saying yesterday.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Wow, you're a Burnhamite.
No, I'm just saying that there can be a trade-off. Ideally, that's what you'd want. But if you're going to have procurement with our European partners in order to have, for example, as the Defence Investment Plan indicates, state-of-the-art aircraft, then some of those jobs will be in Italy or elsewhere. So it's not a zero-sum game. Ideally, everyone can be a winner, but I think one just has to recognise there are trade-offs.
But there are massive economic benefits, though, in terms of really investing in defence. The other thing I would say as well, though, and this is a really important point, the money is incredibly important. We must find the money. But the money must be well spent as well.
Yeah.
And there's been a big issue in terms of procurement across the services. And also, you know, how do you do your procurement more effectively, more flexibly? How do you future-proof some of your investments? That's all precious taxpayers' money, and it needs to be spent wisely.
Peter, very final thought. I know you've got to go. I mean, if you just look at 2.7% of GDP will be spent on defence by 2030, just 4% on schools. I mean, that really puts it into focus, and the need for the money to be well spent, as Aisha just said.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're going to give the MOD this precious money, they've got to spend it well. Defence procurement has been a disaster for decades. Being done by civil servants and always outfoxed by the professionals. That's got to be done better. There's one other elephant in the room we haven't mentioned, which is America. I mean, the Americans are withdrawing from Europe. There's going to be less Americans, less American kit. And by the way, if you don't buy American, then you need to have a European solution. So one of the interesting things in this plan is a UK-German plan to build cheaper long-distance missiles without any American components, because the Americans stopped us using them in Ukraine in the first years.
I'll pick that up with Michael after you've gone. I know you've got to get off, but thanks very much for joining us on The Sofa. Well, let's get more of a sense now about how the Defence Investment Plan was going down among MPs earlier. Our political correspondent, Ali Fortescue, is listening in. Ali, how did it land?
Well, look, Cathy, I mean, it's been a long road for MPs, hasn't it? More than a year of waiting, one Defence Secretary, one Defence Minister lost, and the sense you get is that they think there is still a long road to go yet, especially when it comes to getting to that 3% that John Healey's been talking about, let alone the 3.5% that NATO's been talking about. The Prime Minister saying that we'll give all the sense on that when it comes to the 2027 spending review, which is obviously not going to be his problem. It's going to be Andy Burnham. Burnham's problem. So how is he going to square that circle without having to raise taxes or cut public spending? I think it's worth, for a moment, just looking at what the public think of all this, because an Ipsos poll found that about half of people don't want to see defence spending going up if that means their taxes going up, and 45% don't want defence spending to go up if that means public services are cut. So that is where the public is at. We obviously heard the Prime Minister today talking not about day-to-day spending, but talking about capital spending. And this is not to get 3%, this is just for the 2.7%. And in particular, talking about roads. That is what has angered quite a few MPs, the A38, the A46, these road improvement schemes that would be scrapped. And we've heard quite a bit of reaction. Robert Jenrick saying he's furious, East Midlands Mayor saying it's completely unacceptable. Perhaps the most notable, though, was Hamish Faulkner, the Foreign Office Minister. Very rare to see a sitting minister stand up in the Commons and effectively criticised government plans. He says he's going to be seeking an urgent meeting with the Prime Minister, whoever that may be. But look, there's been quite a response from MPs today. Let's get a bit of a flavour of some of the other responses from MPs in the House of Commons earlier.
What will our society look like 4 years, 8 years, 10 years' time with this continuing decline in investment in what I would call the public realm? What kind of world are we going to be living in?
Look, it's really important that we invest in our housing, that we invest in our roads, that we invest in our transport. I just don't think, taking funding from that area to pay for the Defence Investment Plan is the right option.
But obviously, it is a question of trade-offs for MPs, a question of priorities. The last time we spent 3% on defence, we spent 4% of GDP on the NHS. Now that figure is 9%. So those are the trade-offs Andy Burnham's going to be dealing with. The old Prime Minister, the current Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, obviously in legacy-making mode today. The Defence Secretary, I think, in keeping his job mode with some interesting briefings about how he's been talking directly to the Chancellor, unlike his predecessor. Those are going to be decisions for Andy Burnham, but it will probably be not just the decisions on personnel, but the decisions on where to spend money and where not to spend money that are going to be the most difficult.
Ali, thanks very much for that. Well, Aisha and Michael are still with me here on the sofa. Aisha, this plan has been sharpened, has been the word used, since the last Defence Secretary left a few weeks ago. How will Andy Burnham now respond, given that all these mayors, his mayoral colleagues, are furious? How is it going to be sharpened further?
I think Andy Burnham will understand that his primary duty as Prime Minister is defence of the realm and keeping, the citizens of this country safe. I mean, he's got his sort of domestic agenda, which we heard about yesterday in terms of devolution, but I think he will, care about this deeply, and I think it would be
that was Dan Jarvis's.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like kind of inconceivable that he's going to come in and just be like, do you know what, guys, I'm actually going to rip all of this stuff up. I think he will be very aware that, at the top of his entry will be this defence spending, because he'll know that, very soon he'll have to return to this in terms of trying to find the money to hit this target.
And Michael, could Andy Burnham actually be rather more centrist than perhaps his rhetoric so far has suggested in terms of, for example, finding the welfare reforms that you've alluded to?
Yeah, it's possible. I don't know if centrist is the right word, but it is interesting that he himself has indicated that he's a bit of a social conservative when it comes to questions like crime and migration. He's certainly someone who I don't think is subscribed to trendy, I hate that word, but still, trendy left beliefs in the party, CND and all the rest of that stuff. No, he hasn't gone near that. He's always been pragmatic. Where he's thought to be more left-wing is on economics, but additionally, when it comes to welfare, he has been very clear that he's been persuaded by the arguments that Alan Milburn has put forward, that there's nothing progressive in leaving people to moulder without jobs and without hope. So, again, it is perfectly possible that he could end up being, in the tradition of Jim Callaghan, a Labour figure from a working-class background who defies easy categorisation, and I suppose you are right, in some respects ends up being remembered as a centrist and sensible leader. That's possible.
Right, well, we'll more from you very much so later, but let's speak to one of those angry mayors now. I spoke to her earlier, Labour's East Midlands Mayor, Claire Ward. She said she'd been told that funding for road building in her region would be cut to fund that defence plan. I spoke to her a little bit earlier. Claire Ward, when we're told that Vladimir Putin could attack us by 2030, is cutting some road projects a regrettable price worth paying?
Well, I think there's two issues here. The first is that absolutely the East Midlands wants to be part of playing its role in ensuring the defence of this country, and particularly because we have so many businesses in the East Midlands and across the wider Midlands in the aerospace, defence, advanced manufacturing sector that will play its part in doing that. But I think there is the broader issue, which is one, how do we decide how we are going to fund that defence investment programme? But secondly, the nature in which we engage with regional mayors about how to do that. And what I'm complaining about today is that the East Midlands would appear to be the only region that has been told it is sacrificing its road investments programme in order to be able to contribute to the Defence Investment Plan. And the second is the way in which it's being done.
Right, well, leaning into that last point you make, I mean, what have you been told about the road projects in your area? And when did you find out?
Well, I found out today, pretty much as the statement was being made, that the A46 and the A38, two schemes that we've welcomed over the last few years, will be sacrificed for a roughly £900 million contribution to the Defence Investment Plan.
So what does the way in which you found out about this tell you about the way Westminster treats the regions such as yours?
So when you think about the context of the speech by Andy Burnham yesterday, it was very much about recognising how important our regions are in the engagement with our regions. And what I got today was not that level of engagement, not a sensible grown-up conversation which would say, what is it that you are prepared to contribute in order to support the Defence Investment Plan? And I think there are conversations about how we can contribute, whether or not there is one of those schemes that perhaps would be better than others, than the other one, or to be in a position where we are being told that both of those schemes have gone in order to make that contribution.
But Claire, we were briefed that Andy Burnham was across this plan and, you know, he was content with it. Shouldn't he have spotted this problem, given it makes a mockery of his commitment and vision of devolution?
Well, I don't think... Andy Burnham is not the Prime Minister. He is not in government.
But he was briefed on this plan.
But he's not the Labour. I don't know what briefing has been given to Andy Burnham, and I think it would be wrong to make an assumption that he is suddenly all over the detail of where some of this funding is coming from. What I am saying is that there is a process that's really important. My job, as indeed outlined by Andy yesterday, is to stand up for my region. And that's exactly what I am doing today in saying it's right that we should look at how we contribute to the Defence Investment Plan.
Right.
We know that large numbers of jobs will come in this region from that investment, but we should be engaged in that.
So would you like him to overturn this decision when he becomes Prime Minister, as looks pretty inevitable?
I would like him to engage with me as a regional mayor about how we contribute towards the Defence Investment Plan, but at the same time are able to ensure that we have the right infrastructure for this region. It has to be done in context. The East Midlands is a region that has the lowest levels of investment into transport infrastructure. We've already suffered over the last few years from the cut to the HS2 leg that was going through the eastern region. We haven't had the investment into the Midlands mainline electrification, or indeed big projects for rail investment. So something here isn't right when we are the first region to also be told you are going to lose your road investments.
Have you been in touch with Andy Burnham already about this?
I have not spoken to Andy Burnham about this. As I say, this is a decision that has been made by the government, and I am standing up for my region, for my communities, and making the case that we need to have a different form of engagement with regional mayors about how they contribute towards the defence of our nation, which is absolutely right, but do so in a way which is best for our regions too.
Given what you say about the decades of underinvestment in the region, is this announcement today about what's happening to your roads budget a gift to the Reform Party?
Well, I think this is really disappointing about the process that has taken place and shows that we do need to rewire this country. We need to engage our regional mayors and our communities in all being in this together and making sacrifices in order to be able to defend our country, whilst also recognising that investment needs to take place into infrastructure. And if we don't have those sensible conversations, then this is what happens.
Yeah. I mean, governing is about making difficult choices, isn't it? And there is already a black hole in this defence plan of about over £4 billion, despite what's been taken from the road budgets in your region and others. I mean, would you suggest that the incoming Prime Minister looks at cutting welfare, for example? Because I think I'm right in saying the welfare budget is going to rise £60 billion over the 4 years. The defence budget is rising £17 billion a year over 4 years. So there seems to be an obvious trade-off there. Is that where the next Prime Minister should find the money?
I think the next Prime Minister will need to review all of those things for a range of different reasons. One, because we do need to put more money into defence of this country, and I think that's an acceptable position. But secondly, because if we look at welfare, it's not simply about how much money we're spending, it's about whether or not we are simply trapping people into a life of welfare when actually we should be supporting them wherever possible to get into work, because work provides much more purpose and ultimately people will be better off to support themselves and their families.
Well, the details will be for the next Prime Minister. Thank you very much for your time, Claire Ward.
Thank you.
And that story is sure to feature heavily on our late-night programme, The Wrap, tonight from 10 p.m. Here to discuss all of today's big stories and the best of tomorrow's papers will be the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman and political editor at The Critic, Henry Hill. But joining me now is Dr Ellie Chowns, who's a Green MP and the party's leader in Westminster. Ellie, I mean, being a Green, you're wearing the green dress, you presumably are cheering the axing of the roads budgets, aren't you?
I think that's not the key issue here. The key issue is...
Well, we've just been talking about it, though.
And it is, of course, important to think about where the money comes from. But the point that I was making in the chamber today is that too often we have a conversation about investment in defence, which is about hitting particular numbers, you know, X% of GDP by X year to spend on defence. The questions we need to be asking is, what are we spending it on? And, of course, that has implications for where are we taking it from. We need to think about value for money.
The question I'm asking you is, do you or do you not support the axing the road budgets to put into defence? Forget about the figure for a second.
I think there are some roads that we need to invest in. The roads that we've already got, we need to fix the potholes, maintain the infrastructure that we've already got. I haven't seen the details of the projects that are being axed, but certainly we should be, as Greens, we believe that we should be investing in sustainable transport infrastructure.
OK, so but the roads in Derby and Newark, you know, the ones that are under discussion, do you support the axing of those to put the money into defence? I mean, this is about tough choices, isn't it?
I honestly don't know the details of those particular projects, but I think the conversation we should be having is about what the defence investment plan sets out as priorities for expenditure.
Right.
Now, for example, we saw today in the document that came to Parliament that more than 50% of the capital budget is to be spent on the nuclear programme.
Right.
That means...
And you'd roll that back, would you?
We don't think that we should have nuclear weapons. The question that we would ask is that the best way of spending that money? As it stands, the government is proposing spending more money on a handful of submarines and warheads that can never be used than it proposes to spend on the entirety of every other single bit of equipment and kit and future technology for the whole of the armed forces.
Right, let me bring in the other guests on the sofa here on this very point. Michael, do you have something to say on the nuclear deterrent?
I'm in favour of it.
But, I mean, you've heard what Ellie just said. The proportion of the budget is quite...
There's a very respectable, sceptical case against it. And to be fair, it's not just the Greens that have made it. Former defence ministers like Michael Portillo have questioned whether or not it's the right priority. But I do think that in a world when there are more countries and not necessarily our friends, countries like Iran, that are seeking to acquire nuclear weapons, then I think that it is an absolutely vital, strategic way of ensuring that both the safety of the United Kingdom and the protection of our allies can be enhanced. But Ellie reminds us that it can't be taken for granted. Anyone who believes in the importance of our nuclear deterrent needs to make that argument.
And yeah, go on.
And what's quite interesting is that that argument is not what the Secretary of State for Defence is making. You know, nuclear investment gets a free pass, despite the long history of lack of scrutiny of that expenditure. The Public Accounts Committee just this year made exactly this point. The nuclear programme always goes over budget, doesn't meet its deadlines, and totally fails to have scrutiny.
But how can you support... What I don't get is you support NATO membership, but you oppose the Trident nuclear deterrent.
Yes.
There seems to be a contradiction there.
No, I don't think so at all.
Explain why.
NATO membership is about more than just our nuclear capacity. NATO membership is about being part of a partnership with many other countries of commitment to securing our security collectively and supporting each other. I think
but our nuclear capacity gives us leadership within NATO, doesn't it?
There are many other forms of leadership, and this is, of course, precisely the point, because today, you know, if you listen to the Secretary of State, he's trying to sell this as being about an agile, flexible, future-focused defence plan. He's talking about the $5 billion on drones, but he's not talking about the $64 billion on the nuclear programme, which had such a poor history of cost-effectiveness. We really need to be asking these questions.
And I did push him on that, and he was steadfast on that point. Aisha, can you answer the question that Ellie's raising here?
I think if you're serious about defence, you have to be serious about having the nuclear deterrent. I think, I mean, I say that with a heavy heart, but I think in terms of being a sort of serious, credible senior member of NATO, I think that is a sort of basic hygiene sort of test that you would have to pass.
You were shaking your head.
I disagree. The vast majority of NATO members do not have nuclear capacity, and of course we have no clear arguments being made.
But are you saying, Ellie, that you would seriously, if the Greens came into power, you would say, right, in a world of increasing geopolitical threat, Britain is going to get rid of its nuclear deterrent?
When Russia and China are increasing their...
Is that what you would advocate?
Engaging in a global arms race does not make the world more secure.
There is one country in the last 20 years that has undertaken unilateral nuclear disarmament, and that is Ukraine.
Of course, that's a very specific history in relation to the breakup of the USSR.
Yeah, but it wishes it hadn't.
That is not proof that you've got to have nuclear weapons in order to be secure.
It doesn't prove anything, but it is suggestive.
Michael, the point that I'm making is that the onus has to be on the nuclear industry that to prove that we should spend more on this handful of submarines and warheads than on any other bit of technology or kit for the entire armed forces put together. That case has not been made today. That case has not been made in the public. And so we really need to ask important, serious questions about where we should be directing defence expenditure.
I think that the Ukrainians would say that had they retained their nuclear weapons, then they wouldn't have needed to spend so much and lose so much innocent blood in the conflict that has flowed as a result. Ukraine put its faith in international diplomacy and many of the virtues that Greens understandably advocate for, but when push came to shove, it didn't deter the Russians. So in that sense, I think that as an insurance policy, it has proved its worth. You make a valid point about overspending, and you make a valid point about other areas.
You know, we've said that biological weapons are beyond the pale. We've said that chemical weapons are beyond the pale. Nuclear weapons are also indiscriminate, would kill huge numbers of people. Why do we not put them beyond the pale? What Ukraine has shown us is that it's actually investment in that agile, flexible technology, low cost, relatively, like drones, that does keep a country
So you've just
safe.
been really honest there, which is you've just said, basically, and as is your right, and many people will agree with you, and it is a horrific idea in terms of nuclear weapons, you're basically making a very principled case saying we would just get rid of nuclear weapons and spend that money elsewhere. But you're just being honest saying if there was a Green government, you would get rid of the nuclear weapons because they are beyond the pale.
I'm making both a practical and a principled case.
Yeah, but you're making the case. Yeah, OK.
And do you think that's a vote winner, Ellie, now?
On the principle, I and the Green Party want to see a world without nuclear weapons, and the way to achieve that is to show...
But you're saying that unilaterally Britain would take away its...
If you let me finish, the way to achieve that is to show leadership in moving towards getting rid of nuclear weapons.
And Ellie,
I'm also making it practical.
Do you think it's a vote winner now?
Absolutely. I think that we need to ask these questions. I think that people... You know, people don't just kind of still trust that if they're told, oh, it's the nuclear weapons that will keep us safe and nothing else. When we point out that the government plans to spend more on a tiny, tiny section of weaponry than on any other part of the armed forces altogether, people will be asking themselves those important questions about cost effectiveness. So that is the practical point. We need to ask, where is the investment that is going into defence, narrowly defined? Where is that best spent? But there is another point.
Let Michael come in.
I think Ellie's making her case very powerfully and effectively. It is a debate that we do need to have, and one that we haven't had for a while. I'm just a wee bit sceptical that Prime Minister Zach Polansky would use all the money he saved by scrapping the nuclear deterrent to invest in anti-ballistic missile defence, to expand the size of the army, to have a bigger navy and so on.
But he says climate change is a bigger threat than Russia, which is a point to be debated.
It is. I beg leave to differ, but Ellie will make the case.
And this leads on to the second point that I wanted to make, which is that we need to talk about security in broader terms. We need to recognise that the threats we face are not just from hostile states. And even when they're from hostile states, they're not just launched through the sorts of things that we can counter with the sorts of weapons we're talking about buying. Those threats take the form of things like cyber warfare against private companies, against JLR and M&S. They take the form of things like disinformation, information warfare, poison that spreads through our social media and through people's minds. So we need to recognise that hostile state action takes multiple forms. We also need to recognise other threats that we face. And absolutely, climate breakdown is central to those. There are people in the military, many people...
Is the climate breakdown a bigger threat than Putin?
I honestly, Cathy, I honestly don't think that these kind of really binary discussions about is that a bigger threat or that a bigger threat...
That's what your leader said today, that's all.
Putin is a huge threat, that's absolutely clear. Climate breakdown is a threat with 100% likelihood, and we are already seeing the reality of that. So we need to use diplomacy to minimise those hostile threats.
Ellie, thank you so much for coming on the sofa. I hope you come back another time, and thank you to my other sofa guests too. But I'm going to leave you tonight with this treat in the night sky for those up last night. The summer's first full moon, known as the strawberry moon. And the name is nothing to do with the colour, by the way, but comes from the time of year that wild strawberries would be harvested in North America. That is all for tonight. Thanks to Aisha, Michael and all my guests. I'm back with you tomorrow at 7 p.m. Thank you so much for watching. Bye for now.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist... My darling.
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
Is being a Sky News journalist. You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more. Well, let's kick off and make a statement. What can our Prime Minister say to you to not impose tariffs? He's coming out! What more do you need?
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We're in an area that's just been reclaimed.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
People are directly protesting.
The whole neighbourhood is rallied around her.
It's been impenetrable to journalists over the last 2 years of war in Sudan.
I've been waiting for this for 2 years. It doesn't feel like a big homecoming.
It was never going to be pretty.
War isn't pretty.